Well, hi, Michelle. Hi, Michelle. It's good talking to you today. And I think this is our second Rights in Retrograde episode, and it's a great opportunity to discuss all of the updates that have been happening around the world. Recently, we published during the Mercury retrograde in April. We published the Law's Dual Edge piece that you covered a lot of issues in it. And I want to ask you about that piece that focuses on the court and all of these decisions. Tell me more about that.
Sure. First thing, thank you so much again for having me on, Hala. And thank you for being part of the second issue of the Rights in Retrograde piece. It is quite concerning to think how we were going to pull things out every single retrograde when things would be working against you. But so here we are with our second podcast. And yeah, so I think we should start off with this piece. If you read our last piece, you must read it again. We look a lot at courts and the patterns of courts and what role it plays with accessing rights. And we wanted to show how laws and rights are dual edged. And so we wanted to start with a major positive because we should always start on a high note. And also, I'm from Malaysia, if people don't know, and from Southeast Asia. And what we found is that this was the perfect place to write our love letter to the Caribbean, the people from the Caribbean movement and the courts on how much work and what a trailblazer they've been in decolonization, human rights based activism, and the poetic justice coming out of the courts. Because we just had the recent decriminalization from Dominica, and it's been following in the footsteps of Belize, Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda. And so for us, those of us who are living in countries where it's still a crime under colonial legacies, this is absolutely a motivation for us. And so just a big shout out as well to everybody who's been working so hard. And I also think this really benefits a lot of our readers, especially in Asia, Southeast Asia, because of these things will motivate us to do more.
That's right. That's right.
And when you talk about the law's dual edge, there is then the second part of how courts are not always producing justice as we'd like them to. But before I jump into it, Hala, because the thing about queer legal futures, it should not just be about lawyers. It should be about everybody. And as long as you're queer, you should be part of building a legal future. So what do you think about courts? What are they to you?
Well, to me, I'm definitely not in legal or policy. I'm into communication, and but to me, with everything that we've been seeing recently, courts are scary. That's my impression. We've been seeing how, historically or ideally, courts are where you go get justice or try to get justice, but it's been scary seeing how our rights have been ripped and how we're seeing how it's going backwards, especially with places like Uganda, like Ghana, like Russia, and other and issues for LGBTIQ issues and others. So yeah, it is definitely scary, and that's why it's very important to talk to you as a person who's leading the Queer Legal Futures program at Outright, who can help us decipher what's going on and try to understand why these things are happening. So, like, tell us more about the stories that you covered, and you've covered a lot of stories going around the world.
Well, Hala, I think I have to say, firstly, it was so important to get what you think about the courts because even somebody, I was in litigation and in international law. I would go to court every other day and I would do criminal law in the past. And even if you are at home in a criminal court and you see the judge every day, it is a scary institution. The more marginalized you are, the less access you have to things of privilege, it is a scarier place. So I think that's why this is important for us to have the conversation, especially if people feel that they are not familiar with the law. Because I think we share so much more than people think. Like you can go to law school or not go to law school, but quite honestly, it is a scary place if you are not somebody with privilege. So we're probably in the same boat in many ways like that, I have to say. So I completely agree with you. So we can also move on to some of the more difficult ways that we've seen courts decide. So on the other side of the fence, we have the Uganda Constitutional Court, where they upheld an extremely homophobic law, the Anti Homosexuality Act. And it's rooted in genocidal ideology, erasure. It stigmatizes people who are queer. They look at people who are queer as spies. And also, even if you were renting out, people who are linked to queer people also then become really, they are stigmatizing allyship. And that is something that we really should be on the lookout for, because this seems to be a trend around the world. If you look at Russia, there was a decision in a Supreme Court last year and it's being enforced now. And they pretty much did the same thing, where they labeled people who were supporting the LGBT movement as extremists. And it's not just queer people, but allies. So I think we're living in a time where we should realize that our allies are so important, and they're also now becoming part of being the target. And so there is no more important time than for us all to stand together. And I also just thought of maybe bringing in quite quickly the Ghana legislature, where they passed the Human Rights, Sexual Rights and Family Values Act. And it was passed through Parliament. So this isn't a court thing, it's passed through Parliament. And what it does is that the bill has really broad prohibitions on what consensual same sex is. They're trying to control what the gender binary is. And also, it targets allyship. So we can see some of these concerning patterns. But one thing new for me working at Outright also is to now look at cases, because, for background, I've usually only just covered really the global south. But looking at decisions that have come out of the US, especially after the reversal of Roe versus Wade, we can see a rollback of rights. So I thought of turning it back to you. There have been some decisions coming out of the court. How do you feel as somebody who lives in the US and seeing what the courts, are coming up with recently?
Yeah, it's actually becoming again. My theme today is scary and concerned because as a person who is not from the U.S., I am from Lebanon. I actually moved to the U.S. over 8 years ago as a person who was seeking a better future as a queer person. Since, as you may know, like in Lebanon, it's not legal or to be openly queer, and I wanted to have a better life. And you would assume, and back then it was the case of like being able to come here, and it was right after same-sex marriage was passed, and that life was possible. And I invested a lot of time and money and energy in actually moving here on my own. And for me to actually start building this life here and start seeing all of these possibilities and laws and everything crumble, it's concerning, it's worrying, and it now becomes more personal, because now my fight becomes on divided because I am still involved and concerned about my country and how the LGBTIQ community is being treated, and how my friends and my community there is trying to still fight for the rights there. And now I have to actually continue and make sure that rights where I chose to be are still still protected. So it is sad to see that, and see how like youth now are being targeted, seeing them. Seeing how the trans community is being targeted, and it's very very concerning. And with elections happening here and a lot of countries, as I know you will touch on that later, it's concerning for our communities.
Hala, I think that really struck a chord in me because I moved from Malaysia, and I think we both have something in common where
Mm-hmm.
pride is banned in our countries, or
Yeah.
having rainbow objects could be a crime. I mean, in Malaysia, I don't know if you've heard, having a Swatch watch is a crime. And I think in Lebanon, there are many things like that. And we've both moved to countries where we are now part of another movement, but it's really the same movement. Like, I've also lived in Myanmar, where I attended my first Pride in Yangon, and it was an amazing experience. But now they have the military coup. And but on a better note, like, so I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story, because it really speaks to the fact that our movements are all intertwined around the world. Like, you're in the US, I'm in
Mhm.
Thailand now, I'm Malaysia, and you're from Lebanon. But at the same time, I mean, I could not be more grateful for how multifaceted allyship can be in this community. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Mhm.
And I'm going to now pivot to maybe slightly better news, because so the country I've moved to,
Yes, we need it.
yeah, I mean, we need good news, hey. And I mean, I wish you could join us as well, because right now in Thailand, Thailand is on the way to becoming possibly the first country to legalize marriage equality. And it went through parliament, and it is something that is absolutely historical. And to see our neighbor, as a Malaysian, going through leaps and bounds to possibly grant marriage equality, that is something that just makes my heart sing. And I've never been to Thailand Pride before, so shout out to Thailand activists, Thai Quiz. I'm packing my bags and coming to Bangkok Pride as soon as possible. So there is that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to clarify, you said the first country in Southeast Asia to do that. That's amazing, and we're so excited for that because we're all waiting for this decision.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the thing, I mean, being like, I feel I am a child of Southeast Asia, and we are a puzzle, because you have absolute contradictory countries. You have Thailand on one side for us, and then you have Singapore, which has decriminalized but there's no right to marriage. And
Hmm.
then there's Malaysia, where everything's a crime. And you have Indonesia, which we're not going to talk about today. But shout out to Indonesia as well. But yeah, so Southeast Asia is definitely not monolith, but the positive stories are the things that really keep us going.
Yes, for sure.
So maybe I could also pivot to a new and interesting development, which we should really be giving a shout out to our
Hmm.
colleague, Kimberly, because we see that the intersex people saw a very significant victory, because they've passed the Human Rights Council at the UN, adopted its first ever resolution specifically addressing discrimination, violence, and harmful practices against persons with innate variations in sex characteristics. And this is definitely a result of years of lobbying and hard work. And we can't wait really to see how much we can support this movement. And that also really ties into the major theme of what we're trying to put through in this piece, which is self determination and autonomy. And so, one case
Hmm.
that I thought was very important to highlight is in Japan, where there has been a transgender man's petition to legally change his gender. The Apex Court in Japan in February had finally prohibited the requirement of sterilization. And so the person can finally change their gender markers with full self determination. But for me, it's a beautiful story, and you can see so many people being part of it, and it's a groundbreaking decision. It moves us from the antiquated medical model, because I mean, in so many countries, I mean, there's so many countries where if you need a medical certificate and you need to go through
Hmm.
specific surgery, and more often than not, people don't have the money, they don't have the means, or they might not even have access to specialization. And this is something that echoes through the world, from Botswana to Malaysia to Myanmar, to, everywhere. And so Japan, I think, has started us on an extremely positive road for change. But at the same time, I saw that this person had faced a rejection of the petition in 2016. And that is not the beginning of their long battle for recognition. So my heart really goes out to how long this battle
Mhm.
really takes for people just to fight against such a basic right to not have to go through mandatory sterilization just so they can have matching gender markers. So self determination is at all levels. I believe it's so important in our work and we don't talk about it enough.
That's right, and this is again, what our colleagues in the global trans program, Ricky is working on. And last year we released the legal gender recognition campaign to celebrate 18 countries who actually allow a determined legal gender recognition. Among those are like Argentina, Switzerland, Malta, Iceland, and we have that list. We hope that it continues to grow because it is very important. And I've talked to a lot of people and about their stories and how it changed their life, and just feeling that self, you know, you have that control of your life, and dignity, and an ability to live your life truly, and getting jobs and travel. So it just validates who they are, and we want that for everyone. So we hope to keep growing that list, and having more countries who do that. Yeah. So Michelle, as you being the person who's working on queer legal future, tell us what's on the horizon. What's in our future?
Well, that's a good question. And I always turn it back to the person asking me, especially if you're queer, because it's our future, it's our collective future. And what I do think we have to be on the lookout for is, first of all, how we can be more intersectional in our work and also recognize that our rights are inalienable, it's universal, it's indivisible, and it applies at all times, especially in conflict or in peacetime. We ought to be looking out for ways to always alleviate the suffering of all people. Our struggle must be intersectional, and looking out as well where the laws can be used as a tool to support and create better lives, and then also to be on the lookout for antiquated legislation, antiquated models like the medical model, and how these things can be strategically abolished and how it can make life so much better for people. But then, of course, on the other side, it's not, of course, just the law. It's also about really creating better environments, better access to food. I mean, you can't have a good life if you don't have food on your table, if you can't be free to be who you are. So all of these things must come together. And that would be an ideal queer legal future for me, really.
That's great. And again, like, I want to use this opportunity to shout out all of um our community, our activists and partners who actually work on the ground and are continuing to make that queer legal future and queer future happen. And in these different struggles, they're not stopping. We've been talking to activists in all of these countries like Uganda and Ghana and Russia and every other place where these developments are happening, and they're still persisting. So we want them to know that we are always supporting. And thank you for everyone who's doing that work. And thank you, Michelle, for being here today. And until next retrograde.
See you next retrograde. And that was a wonderful shout out, Hala. Thank you so much for having me. Take care.